My friends, I am now the proud owner of a small army of German blue rams. I bred them here at home, and I'm really excited to tell you about how I did that. It was a lot easier than I expected it to be. They have a reputation for being difficult, and I didn't find it to be, so I'm really excited to share that with you. With that said, let's get into it. Alright, so let's spend just a few minutes on tank setup. I spawn my rams in this 10-gallon that you see here. It's oriented lengthwise, and if you can tell, the bottom, both sides and the back are painted black on the outside, so this helps the fish to feel calm and protected, not have to worry about possible predation. That helps a lot to make them feel safe enough to spawn. Next, I gave them some even further sheltered spawning sites. This is a really popular method if you go researching how to get rams to spawn. A half flower pot and a little flat stone. And when it comes time for them to spawn, they will lay their eggs on top of the stone. Now there's a second batch of little baby rams back there, so I'm going to leave them alone. But if I was setting this up to spawn again, I actually do two of these, one in the front and one in the opposite back corner so that they have some options. This plant right here is a Pogostem installatus octopus in an easy planter, and I put this in the middle between the two spawning sites so that there would be some kind of a line of sight break in case there happened to be aggression between the male and the female. Speaking of aggression, if you want to do any tank cleaning, do it before they spawn. Once eggs or fry around, the parents will attack anything that comes close. Bites don't hurt, but it's possible that they could injure themselves fighting with you, so be careful of that. Once they spawn, it's pretty much over. So if you decide to do the same thing where you paint the sides black and you keep them nice and calm, just a heads up, they might not necessarily spawn on top of the rock. For example, in my first spawn in this tank, they chose to spawn in one of these depressions on the side of the easy planter. Prior to the spawn, you're probably going to want to do a good deal of conditioning. And by that I mean feeding the female in particular with a lot of high quality food that will give her the nutrients that she needs to make her eggs. And that could be a concern for you, feeding that much into just a 10-gallon aquarium. This setup is actually a little more complicated than that. It's 20 gallons of water total, but I will make and put up a second video to explain that. I won't take your time with that right now. For conditioning, I chose to feed my rams primarily live baby brine shrimp, some frozen bloodworms, and the occasional high-quality pellet, but mostly those high-fat, high-protein live or frozen foods. Just a few other details about the tank here. I keep this at 84 degrees. I think that's a great temperature for keeping and breeding rams. In terms of pH and hardness, I can't really give you advice on that. I think if you've had your rams for any length of time and they aren't dead, your water's probably fine. Really, it's going to come down to where they were bred. They will adapt to whatever water conditions they're kept and bred in, so you just need to find out where yours came from and how they kept them, and then if you can match that, do your best. But if not, they will adapt. If you don't already have the fish that you're going to breed, obviously you're going to need a male and a female, and it can be a little challenging to tell them apart in a store because they're probably going to be stressed out and stuck in a tank with a bunch of other males, and they'll likely suppress their color. There are a few things you can look for to help tell them apart. Males will normally have taller dorsal fins with an extended ray in the front, but that's not a guarantee. Some females will show the same trait. Another thing to look for is the large black spots on the side of their bodies and nearest to their heads. Females will usually have a bright blue set of specks inside of that spot, and males usually won't. Again, there's no guarantee. In my opinion, the only reliable way to tell them apart is to look for a bright pink underbelly found only on sexually mature females. Once you have your fish in here and you've been doing some conditioning, there are a few signs you can look out for to know that a spawn is coming. For one, the female, her belly will be kind of swelling up as she fills up with eggs. You'll know when you're really close to a spawn when you see both fish, but mostly the female, spending a lot of time around one of your spawning sites or maybe some other object in the tank, and she's going to sit there and peck at it and clean it for hours and hours. They'll usually do it over 2 days, mostly on the second day, but you'll see them starting to pick a spawning site on the day prior. If you want to catch them actually spawning, my advice would be keep an eye on them towards the end of the day, close to when your lights would usually go out. I've seen 4 or 5 spawns now, and every time it's been in the last few hours before the lights go off. And I don't know if that's because they know lights about to go off, they know night's coming, and they want to spawn in the dark to add some element of safety, or if they just won't spawn unless they've spent a solid 8 hours cleaning the spawning site, which would necessitate them spending a whole day before actually spawning. Once they start spawning, the whole process can take several hours. I recently got one on camera, caught the whole spawn, and in total it took about 4.5 hours. So, if you find them spawning and it's at nighttime, you might want to make sure that your lights don't go off that night. Maybe you just turn them down to dim and disable the timer because you don't want to interrupt the process. You want to get as many eggs as you can to ensure you have more that might be fertile and hatch. The time it takes the eggs to hatch will vary depending on your temperature, but if you're keeping yours at about the same temperature as me, around 83, 84, 85, it seems to take about 36 hours for the eggs to hatch, and the long-term estimate is usually 48 hours. Once you have some eggs, you need to make a decision. There's two ways you can raise rams. You can either leave them with the parents and hope that they'll raise the fry themselves, which is really cool to see if you get the opportunity. I think if this is your first time, you should definitely try letting them raise them. And I have some advice that might help you succeed with getting the parents to raise rather than eat them. But an alternative is that while the eggs are still on the stone, you can pull them out and let them hatch separately. Now, fungus is always an issue if they don't have the parents there guarding the eggs and fanning fresh water on them. It prevents fungus just from the water movement, but also those eggs need to absorb oxygen through the water. So having fresh water fanned on them by the parents keeps them alive. It's a little more challenging to hatch the eggs separate from the parents, but you can. You can put them in a separate container, put a little air stone in there, maybe dose the water with some methylene blue or another chemical additive that won't kill them, but will prevent fungal growth. Now, I've tried this both ways because I really wanted to learn how each way would turn out. So I let a batch be raised by the parents, and I also pulled a batch of eggs to let them hatch separately and see what the difference was in survival rates and what the challenges will be. So I'll tell you about the batch that I hatched myself separate from the parents later, but for now I'm just going to focus on raising the fry with the parents. Once the eggs hatch, you'll see what are referred to as wigglers. They look really just like an egg with a tail sticking out. That's the newly hatched fry. And they have a little adhesive gland on their head that sticks them to whatever they were on when they hatched. So they won't move on their own unless the parents move them, which they will. And that can be a little freaky if you see that happening. It looks like the adults are eating the fry, but just watch them close because what they're probably doing is they're just picking it up in their mouth and then they're going to go somewhere else where they want the fry to be and spit them back out. And even when the fry are free swimming, they're going to keep doing that. They like to keep the fry in a nice tight little cluster so that they can keep them safe and also herd them around the tank looking for food. So don't be surprised if you see the parents for a while swimming around, catching fry, and then spitting them back out into the center of that cloud of fry. Once your eggs have hatched, but they're in that wiggler stage where they're not free swimming and they're just stuck to a rock or the ground, you don't need to feed them. They're not even capable of eating. So anything you feed them, they're not going to eat. I do recommend that you keep feeding the parents. That was one of the things I tried to do to keep them from eating the eggs or the fry, was keep them so well fed that they really had no appetite left to eat the fry. Another thing I recommend to help keep the fry safe from the parents is don't let the lights go completely off. I've noticed that they do learn who the other fish are. They know that the fry are theirs, but when the lights go completely black, and that was an issue especially for me in this blacked out tank, when this tank light goes off, it is pitch black in there. So the fish are a little smart. They know who other fish are. But if you black it out for an entire night, they'll wake back up in the morning when the lights come on, and they will literally forget who the other fish are. You'll see more aggression between the male and the female, and I personally suspect that after a night in total darkness, they might wake up and say, look at these fry, let's eat them. They might forget that they're theirs and forget their desire to protect them and just eat them instead. That's just a theory, but it worked for me. Don't turn the lights off at night, just dim them down, and I'll do my best to show you the level of light that I used. So after a few days, probably 2 or 3, you'll see your wigglers start to lift off the ground and start to swim around. And when they're all free swimming, you'll just see a cloud of fry hanging out around the parents. And at this point, you want to start feeding. The first thing I fed my fry was a fry powder mixed up with water and then squirted right in their faces with a pipette. The parents did not want me getting that close to the fry, but they needed some food, so it had to be done. In the first few days, I feel like my fry really benefited from being in a tank that had a little bit of mulm on the bottom and also some plant matter. I feel like in between feedings, they were able to move around the tank and graze on whatever little microorganisms they could find, or maybe some algae on the bottom or the side of the tank. And I think that helped get them through. I don't think they would have died without it, but I do think it helps to keep them busy and active and fed in between feedings. I personally can only manage 3 a day: before work, after work, and then before bed. And I'd love to give them more than that, so I think that having something to graze on in the tank did a lot for them. On the second day, they had already grown a little bit, so I started introducing some vinegar eels. And that's a little tough in a tank like this. Same thing, squirted right in their face with a pipette, and they might have grabbed some, but mostly they just blew around the tank. And I'm only assuming that they were able to eat some, but they continued to grow. They looked fine, so I think they did. When I raised them myself in an enclosure, vinegar eels were a big part of that process for the first week. On the third day free swimming, I noticed that they had gotten large enough that I suspected they might be able to take live baby brine shrimp. So I gave it a shot, and it worked. I was able to see quickly that their bellies filled up with that pink-orange color, showing that they had eaten brine shrimp. But there's a catch. I wasn't feeding normal brine shrimp. I was feeding the special Franciscana strain that hatches out at a much smaller size. But still, brine shrimp on the third day free swimming is a big load off my mind. That's easy mode. Once they start eating brine shrimp, it's over. Just don't kill them some other way, and feeding is handled. I have to be honest, I was actually nervous to even bring rams home, much less breed them. They have quite a reputation for being difficult to keep alive and difficult to breed. But I was pleasantly surprised by both how easy it's been to keep the parents happy and the fry. So far, there is no fish I've bred that I found easier to raise than rams, and I attribute that mostly to them being such good eaters. They'll eat off the ground, off the walls, off the surface of the water, and anywhere in between, which means you don't have to worry too much about getting the food in a particular location. They'll go find it. Once I got the fry on brine shrimp, it took about another 4 to 5 days before they got large enough for me to switch them to a normal strain of baby brine shrimp. And that's mostly what they've been eating ever since. Daily, I feed them 3 times with the live baby brine shrimp. The only difference is occasionally I will mix in some high quality prepared foods, maybe a ground up pellet or flake or something like that, just to give them some nutritional diversity. I love baby brine shrimp, but I love these rams even more. I want to take care of them, so maybe mostly out of paranoia, I've been mixing up their diet a little bit, because I know baby brine shrimp work. I ended up leaving the parents with the fry for a total of about 3 weeks. I removed the female after about 10 days to 2 weeks when I saw her starting to fatten up again and prepare to spawn again. When I saw her pecking at a site like she was going to spawn there, I removed her because I've done some research, some reading, and I've heard that if they spawn with fry in the tank, they will clear out, and that means eat, the fry from the previous batch to make room for the new batch. I think in nature, what would normally happen is when they were getting ready to spawn again, the adults would just chase away their previous batch. That aggression that would lead to them eating them, that would just scare them off and they'll go be independent. And that's what would normally happen in nature. But here, the fry have nowhere to go, so they just end up getting eaten. It feels to me like a natural conclusion to an unnatural circumstance. Now, the male I left with the fry for another week or so, just because it was so fun watching him herd that little cloud of fry around the tank. I only removed him when I saw something that seemed like aggression towards the fry. And really, I don't think it was even aggression. I think the problem was that the fry got too big to fit in his mouth. So when he would try to corral them in, which means grab them and spit them back out, he'd spit them back out kind of roughed up, kind of mangled. And as soon as I saw that, I said, "You're out of here," and I took him out. The fry did fine without him, by the way. After I removed the male, I left the fry in this 10-gallon tank for another couple of weeks, maybe 2.5, until they grew large enough that I felt like they could manage the pressure of swimming across large distances in a 40 breeder where I would grow them out. I would say they got to about a 1/2 inch long in here before I removed them. So I want to spend just a moment talking about what was different when I raised the fry separately from the parents. So first of all, I've tried doing the chemical thing to keep fungus from going on the eggs. It may work, but I think there might be an easier way. This is what I will do personally. What I've done is I've let the rams spawn, and I usually know when they spawn because I watch this tank like a hawk. And then what I do is I pull them a little over 24 hours later. I let the parents do that fanning and oxygenation and monitoring of the eggs. They'll see any that are infertile and decaying and remove those. I let them do that work for me without chemicals. And then within a few hours of when I think they're going to hatch, I pull the stone and put it somewhere else and they just hatch. So it's a very easy way to get the job done. The trick is you have to know when they spawned and then kind of start a clock. Watching the fry hatch and develop in a container that I could watch closely was pretty cool. I got to see in a little more detail how that development would go. Otherwise, it was about the same. The feeding schedule and pattern was the same as it was for the other fry. I started with fry powder on the first day. I actually gave them some paramecium too, but I just wanted to. You don't have to. And then after the second day, some vinegar eels. And then over the next several days, a combination of vinegar eels and the Franciscana brine shrimp. It was about 6 or 7 days after that I switched to the normal strain. And I actually switched them to a breeding box because I just can't stand cleaning anything made of mesh, and I really wanted to watch them closely. They did fine in there, and then after a short while, I put them into this 10-gallon that you see here, and that's this batch. And they're doing great. I'll let them keep growing just like I did the others, and they'll go to a 40 breeder to grow out. So I think that's about all the useful information I can give you right now. I hope I didn't leave out anything important, but if I did and you have a question, just let me know. Leave a comment, and I'll get back to you. At any rate, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.